Today we're going to look at the ultimate guide for creating a great tone on your Line 6 Helix and also your HX Stomp and HX Stomp XL for 2025. Let's dive right over to HX Edit and get to it. All right, so here we are over in HX Edit, and basically I have a blank slate here. This is what you're going to see when you come over to your list of presets and you see new preset and we click on one of those. You are going to basically have this blank slate of two paths to work with. Now, there's a couple things we want to talk about before we even get started with adding any blocks or creating a tone. One of the main purposes of these two paths is very important to understand. We have two processors within the Line 6 Helix that are only going to be able to handle a certain amount of effects or amps or cabs or whatever we add to our path. It is very important to understand that path A works off of one of those processors and path B works off of another. So let's say we come up to path A and, we add an amplifier of choice, and then we say I'm going to add a cab, and maybe we move those over, and we can do this. We can slide these around. Let's say we wanted to add one of the poly effects, such as the poly pitch, let's say, and then we come over here and we say, okay, I'm going to add a nice little delay here, and maybe I'll grab a transistor tape. And then over here, I'm going to add some reverb. I mean, we notice that our reverb is grayed out. Well, what's happened is we've maxed out the processor on this top line. So if we started to drag some of our effects or amps down to path 2, what you're going to notice now is because I'm not just utilizing the first processor, I'm now utilizing the second processor, you see that we now have choice of reverbs again. So balancing the processing power between the two paths is going to be very important. So that's something to keep in mind that I just wanted to talk about. So a lot of people don't realize that. Now, starting back here on the blank slate of two empty paths, one of the first things I like to do is I like to go to the end of my first path, and I like to click on the output block and hit the path 2A. Now, what this is going to allow us to do is coming into the Helix, we're going to be able to add blocks onto path A, and then it's automatically going to route the signal to path B. So we're going to be able to take advantage of what we just talked about balancing the processing power between the two paths. Now, obviously, if you were going to use this for a different purpose where we're going to share the two paths for different inputs, then that's going to be a different thing altogether. But we're going to deal with this for today. So we're going to come over here and we are going to click the input block first. One of the first things I like to do is make sure that I have my input gate turned on. Now we'll have to adjust this depending on the situation, the guitar we have plugged into it and whatnot. But we do want to turn that on more than likely. I mean, if we're using a very clean tone without much gain, we might be able to get away without it on. But as we add more gain and get heavier tones, we might get some noise, and the gate works really nicely, and we can control that decay of that gate and the threshold here, which we have to kind of wait till we start playing to really be able to utilize that. The guitar input impedance, I usually leave set to auto, but you can mess around with this if you so desire, but let's just leave it to auto for now. And guitar pad, usually, unless I'm using a very high output guitar, that's going to be off. But you can also set it to whatever your global setting is. And if you have it globally set to off, then that's fine. But maybe you have it globally set to off, but you want it on for a certain preset. So we can leave that there. Let's just leave that off for now. So the first thing that I'm going to do when creating a preset is I'm going to add an amp block, obviously, because I need to process my guitar with the core sound I'm after. Now, if you notice, I don't come over to the first block here and do that because maybe I want to add some stuff before it after the fact. So let's come over somewhere around the middle, and I'm going to come down to amp. Now I can come to amp and cab, which when I click that, it's going to add the amp and the cab in the same block. Now that's good for conserving blocks if we maybe need more blocks, but there are situations where having the amp cab in the same block can kind of paint us into a corner. So it's going to be up to you how you want to go about this, but let's for today use the amp. And I think for today, what I'm going to utilize is one of the new Line 6 original amps that we recently got in a firmware update, which is the Line 6 Aristocrat. I'm going to grab a guitar so we can start listening to things. So here I have my beautiful new Fender 50s Custom Shop Strat. Now, here's the thing. If I just add an amp block, we notice that's not going to sound very good. Now, you might say, well, no kidding, we don't have a cab after it. But a lot of newcomers to the Helix will make this mistake where they forget to add a cab after it, and then they wonder why things sound so buzzy. So after adding an amp block, without even touching anything, I want to make sure that I have a cab included in this. So one thing we want to be careful of is to not just go to cab and then choose a cab, because what's going to happen is now our amp is gone. So come back over to the amp, we'll find the Aristocrat again. Now I'm going to go select an empty block, and then I'm going to go down to cab. Over here is a list of all my effects and amps and whatnot. Then I have to choose a suitable cab. I could maybe go with something like the 112 Open Cream. Let's try that. And now we're going to see things are going to sound quite different. That's a cab I really enjoy a lot. So I now have something that actually sounds like a proper guitar plugged into an amplifier. Now, we should never underestimate how much of an effect on the tone changing the cab is going to have. You can really hear a big difference in our tone, depending on the cab we choose. Let's just stick with this 112 Open Cream. So you might want to experiment and choose the right cab. Now, after you've chosen the right cab or the cab that you desire, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a microphone, because the microphone is going to be such a huge part of our sound. Anybody who watches my channel knows that I love ribbon mics. So starting with something like the 121 ribbon, you'll hear a real dramatic change compared to the 906 dynamic that was just there. It's a little bit smoother, which is what I like about the ribbon mics. There's other ribbons in here. The 160 ribbon is going to be a little flatter. Or we can go to the 4038, going to be big and woolly sounding. And the 84. I'm going to stick with this 160. I like that, what that's giving me right off the bat. Now, the next thing, once we have our mic in position, is we're going to want to deal with the position of the mic, which is going to, again, dramatically change the sound we're getting out of this combination of amp, speaker, and mic. So watch as we move this. Angle it. It really acts like an equalizer. And depending on where we put this, it's going to have a dramatic effect on our tone, as well as the distance. As we pull it back, we lose some of those bass frequencies. As we move it in, it gets fuller. As we move closer to the center of the cone, we're going to get more upper end, sort of harsher frequencies. As we move out to the edge, it's going to smooth out. So we do want to try to find a good balance between everything. Let's start with the cap edge and pulling this back a couple to 2-3 inches maybe. From there, you can try angling it. It's something you like. So I'm happy with that. Now, this doesn't have to be perfect at this point, because there's so many more things we can do here to basically dial things in. We haven't even touched the tone stack of the amp. Now, obviously, we could get this in the ballpark of where we want it, something like what I have here. On my neck pickup, if I go to the bridge. Again, that's quite bone dry at the moment. So, I mean, we're going to fix all of that as we go through this step by step. But let's maybe leave it there for now, or maybe even just pull this slightly off the cap edge. Sounds nice between the different pickup positions. All right, now we also have to decide what we want to do here as far as level of gain. Now, one thing we can do is we can come in here and lower the drive, which is going to clean the tone up. depending on the amp we're using, obviously. We could start there, and I'm going to do something interesting. I'm going to right-click on this, and I'm going to select Snapshot. So now on Snapshot 1, I could have this at one drive level, and I'm also going to come down and enable snapshots on this channel volume, so I can get a little more volume out of things here. Now, if I move to Snapshot 2, you're going to see things move here. I'm going to bring this back up closer. I'm going to add some more drive. You'll notice the volume jumps a lot, so I'm going to compensate by moving the channel volume down. Now, if I go back to Snapshot 1, here we have a cleaner tone. Snapshot 2, we want to get the volumes kind of balanced between the two. Cleaner. Now, if I'm going to go to Snapshot 3, remember we have 2.1 and 9 on the channel, one drive and volume. So I'm going to bring this, let's go all the way up to maybe 7.2. We're not going to need as much channel volume here. So we now have 3 levels of gain we can mess with. And we could also snapshot enable the EQ if we so desire, if we felt the need to do that. We can simply right click on that and find snapshots in the list here. And we can have any one of these parameters controlled as we switch snapshots, so we have different settings on them. But let's keep it fairly simple for now. We'll start here. Neck pickup. Let's say I wanted to maybe just bring the bass down a little bit more presence and treble. All right, I'm kind of happy with that. That's going to give me a nice little starting point. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to my second pass, and I'm going to add a little bit of reverb here. And I'm basically creating what is going to turn out to be the template that I always use and that I have up on my website that I'm going to leave a link to below. And I'm going to add reverb, but I want to make sure whether I choose mono or stereo correctly. If you are just going to create a mono preset, then you're fine on mono. But if we want something that we're going to be going out to stereo, we want to make sure that we do select stereo here. So I'm going to start off with maybe the dynamic room. These are the default settings. I am going to engage trails. And what trails means is that when we switch snapshots or disengage the reverb, the remaining reverb tail that's already in existence isn't going to get cut off abruptly when we turn the reverb off or switch between snapshots. Let's just hear what this sounds like on these default settings. You can already hear it kind of brings to life a little bit more into this preset. I could maybe decide that that's a little too much decay and maybe bring that mix up a little tiny bit now that we brought that decay back. So I always like to have some sort of reverb on there. Another nice one, we'll just leave our settings there. Another nice reverb to use if you just want something to not overtake your preset, but to just get rid of that bone dryness, is that dynamic ambience block, which is very cool. My favorite settings on this are here: the room size at 12 meters, the shape at late 100, and the mix around 38%. Turn that off. Back to being bone dry. And And I think for this, we're going to leave that one on. We'll get rid of this dynamic room, but it's really going to be personal preference what you want. But I do usually like to add some sort of reverb or ambience just to give an extra dimension to the tone. Now, one of the other things I add in always into all my presets, and this is one of the tips that so many people have thanked me for, is I'm going to add an EQ block in. This one can be mono or stereo because I put it basically here, usually right after the amp and cab block. This is going to be the low and high shelf. But again, if you want to keep that stereo, it's really not going to make a difference. And the settings I really like to start with are setting both the low and high frequencies at 650 hertz. Now, it may or may not need this. I was kind of happy with the way this sounded before, but it does give us an ability to tweak a preset in a very quick, intuitive fashion. All these frequencies below 650 are basically going to clean up any mud or low end that might get in the way. And any of the frequencies above 650 are going to either add some sparkle or potentially take some harshness away from the tone. So here it is without these settings. You can kind of see there's just a little more sparkle and openness to the sound. It's a tone we thought we really liked. And I find it just polishes things. Now, in this particular situation, I might come in here and accidentally drop the bottom by 1 dB. Here it's a little cloudy and muddy. I add this in. And all of a sudden it polishes things up. So that's going to kind of be usually an always on sort of thing for me. So thinking of what we've just added, we started off with just an amp with no cab block. Sounds terrible, obviously. We added that cab block in. We came and chose the right speaker, the right mic, positioned it appropriately. Ended up with that. Added in some dynamic ambience. Then polished things up with the high and low shelf EQ. And we're starting to get a beautiful tone here. Now, next thing I like to do is come right to the end of the chain. Yes, even after my time effects. And I'm going to add in a compressor. So I'm going to go to my dynamic section. Now, very important, we have a stereo reverb here. If we add a mono block after it, so if we come into the dynamic section and go to the LA Studio Comp and add in a mono studio comp, we've killed the stereo effect of the reverb. So you can hear we have this stereo feel, which collapses as soon as I engage the studio comp. So what we want to do is come in here and actually turn that into a stereo block. Then we don't collapse the stereo down to mono. Now, as far as settings go on the compression, I don't want this to be overt. I can't stress that enough. So I'm going to usually leave the gain in and around 5, leave the type to compress, emphasis where it's at. Mix is usually at 100%, but again, this is really going to be dependent on what we're trying to accomplish. But for this, I'm going to need to look down at my hardware floor unit underneath the table in my case here, and I want to watch the gain reduction meter, and I only want it moving extremely subtly, maybe 1 to 2 dB of gain reduction. Right about there. Now, the thing about it is, if I disengage this is getting a little bit louder when I engage it, which is fine if it's going to be an always on sort of thing, which it is for me. But what we can do is just sort of use our final output block here, bring that down a couple dB. Now you can sort of hear the before and after volume, whether it's engaged or disengaged, is the same. And that'll sort of let you hear that it's not really doing a lot to the sound here. It's just smoothing things out very subtly. So beautiful, beautiful stuff. Now, the other thing I like to always kind of add in is a touch of delay, just in case I need it. And my favorite by far is a transistor tape. Always set to the note sync so we can tap tempo at feedback around 25%, mix around 30%. Maybe a little bit of wow and flutter there. Now, these are all tricks we can use regardless of whether we're using a really heavy sounding amp. Maybe you want a different style of delay, but the shelf EQ and the compression is going to work beautifully to just kind of give a polish, an overall polish to the sound. Now, another block I like to add in there is a parametric EQ block right before the compression. And I want to make that stereo again so as not to lose the potential stereo effect of our delay and our reverb. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to go to a parametric EQ block, make sure it's stereo, parametric. Now, this is going to be only for the low and high cut. Now, we can add it on the cab, but I have it turned off. I like to do it here. It's a little bit more of a drastic slope to these cuts when we're here. And I like to start these off around 100 hertz on the low cuts and maybe 12 kilohertz on the high cut. A lot of people say to go much lower. I don't really think it does much for us other than potentially get rid of some very important sparkle that we have in the sound. That's going to be very subtle again. Now, lastly, we would want to make sure that we have either not too hot a signal or not too low a signal coming out of our preset, or to be able to balance this level with other presets we have. And usually what I will use is the final output block for that. So if we now do this, I'm going to set up a snapshot. And remember, we're on snapshot 2 here. But I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to go over to snapshot 4, and I'm going to paste this in there so that snapshot 2 and snapshot 4 are exactly the same. Okay, nothing different there. But on snapshot 4 here, I am going to actually disengage all of these sweetener tracks that I put in. So I'll just show you what going between those is going to sound like. So this is no low and high cut, this is no compression, this is no low and high shelf, no reverb, and no delay. And we got a nice usable tone, but we can make it very polished and mix ready. And even if we get rid of that delay, let's do this. Now, it depends on your personal taste, but we may want to come in here and only have our low cuts down to, let's say, 80, and maybe come to the low and high shelf here and maybe not take as much out of the bottom end. You know, we can really play around with. And it's going to be very dependent on what we like to use. But the beautiful thing about having something like the low and high shelf in there is that this gives us a very quick way on the fly to be able to make tweaks and changes to our tone in a very intuitive way without having to dive in and start getting into core things like our microphone and microphone placement. We can have a very similar effect here. You can see here if I was to bring this way down, it acts as a really useful tone control. We end up with some beautiful results. Add that delay back in. And those are the things that I do on pretty much every preset, which gives me a great set of tools to be able to shape almost any tone. All right, there you have it. I hope that I covered everything, and I hope that I gave you some great tips that are going to help you to really dial in the tone that you want. It's a tough thing to talk about because everybody has a different result they're looking for. Some people want heavier tones, some people want edge of breakup, some people want clean. But I think with the general tips we talked about today, it's going to allow you to get off and running regardless of the style of tone you're looking for, and I really do hope it was helpful. Thank you guys so much for sharing your time with me. Please like the video, share it with anybody you think would get some use or enjoyment out of watching it. Also, please subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I'll be back with lots more for the Helix and HX Stomp in the very near future. Today I'm going to leave you with one of the demo videos for one of my Line 6 Marketplace presets that is available at the link below. If you're so inclined, you can go grab it there. I hope you enjoy the music on the way out. We'll talk very soon. Ciao for now.